Hello, I'm Stacy Smith, and welcome to another edition of Around the Table, Politics 2020. This is where we discuss the political state of things and some other thoughts of our great array of analysts. And joining us, as they always do every week, are our analysts. And we'll begin with Governor Tom Corbett, the former Republican governor of Pennsylvania. Mr. Corbett also served as State Attorney General and the U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Pennsylvania. Governor Corbett teaches law right now at Duquesne University. On the other side of the table is former chairman of the State Democratic Party, Jim Byrne. Jim also served as chairman of the Allegheny County Council and as mayor of Millvale. He is an attorney here in Pittsburgh. Not an attorney, but with his own consulting firm is Keith Schmidt. Keith's political background is strong as well, having served as a state director for former Republican Senator Rick Santorum. Keith has also worked on Santorum's presidential campaign. Amanda Green Hawkins is a Democrat and served as a national committee woman to the Democratic National Party representing Pennsylvania. Amanda also served on Allegheny County Council and is currently an attorney for a major union that is based here in Pittsburgh. Moving back to the GOP side, if we can for a moment, we find Chris Fry, who is serving in his first term as mayor of Newcastle. And now we turn to the great philosopher of Around the Table. And now, Joe Mystic. Joe is a familiar name in Democratic politics in the state, having worked in front of and behind the scenes and the cameras of this. Joe also has a weekly column in the Tribune Review. It's published every Sunday. And Joe teaches law at Duquesne University. I want to thank all of you for joining us again this morning on Around the Table. As we start to record this, not too long ago, the Supreme Court issued two rulings that could have an effect on the politics of the presidential campaign. The first ruling, which affects the president, is that the court, and I'm going to turn right now to Governor Tom Corbett, because Governor Corbett is the one who also served as State Attorney General and was a U.S. Attorney and teaches law. The first ruling came in relation to that the president is not immune from investigations. Am I correct about that?
That's correct. Now, I'm going to base this on hearsay because none of us have had the opportunity to read the opinion, and we're taking it off of what we hear from the media. But the court has said that his documents are subject to a grand jury subpoena issued by the District Attorney of Manhattan, Cyrus Vance Jr., and that they will have to be turned over. That is a defeat to the president in his claim of immunity. However, in the request for documents from Congress and the subpoena there, they, as I understand it, really made no decision, said that the Congress hadn't gone through the necessary levels of the federal court system in order to get up to them, and they pushed it back. They didn't say that he was immune. They didn't say he wasn't immune. They're pushing it back and having the lower courts get to that. So from the president's perspective, for the election, Congress, that decision won't be made before the election. Probably not likely to happen in the state system that fast before the election, because remember, these records are grand jury subpoenas. They are kept confidential, and it'll be very interesting to watch how long the prosecutor keeps them confidential.
Or before they're leaked, exactly, somewhere along the line.
They better not be leaked from a grand jury. That's a whole nother investigation.
Well, that's probably very true there as well. But you never know; it can be leaked from one of the accounting firms or whoever it might be. I'm going to bring in Joe Mystic now because Joe teaches law with you at Duquesne University. Joe, your take on the court's ruling?
Essentially, what the court has said is that Donald Trump is no better than Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon tried to withhold documents, had tried to resist subpoenas, and the court said that no president is above the law, and that's the case here too.
All right, now let's bring in Keith Schmidt. Keith, from the political perspective, if the president were your candidate, how would you react? What would you do?
Well, I agree with both Joe and with the former governor. I mean, justice is blind. It's not a Republican or a Democratic situation. It's the law, and no one is above the law. The question is, how does this ruling affect the presidential campaign? And I'm not so sure that those reverberations won't be more tend to be next year or the following years. I'm not sure in the next few months the reverberations of these rulings will necessarily affect the outcome of the presidential election. But listen, I'm a Republican, and I believe what Joe said. No one's above the law, and let sunshine be put on this situation. And if there were criminal allegations, then they should be pursued. I have a sense that the president will weather this but he needs to weather it like any other citizen in the United States of America.
All right, Amanda, you served as National Committee woman of the Democratic National Committee. Are Democrats at this point licking their chops over this? Can it be used in the upcoming election?
Well, I think what's more important than, enjoying the decisions from the Supreme Court is that we have a situation where people are looking at this and what's going on. And we know that people have felt bias in our judicial system based on their race and gender and economic status and all of that. And to see a Supreme Court come in and say that a president of the United States is not above the law is very reassuring, and it does instill confidence in our system. And I think that that is the biggest takeaway from the Supreme Court decision. Aside from the impact that it may have on an election, it's about building trust in our system, and I think that's what they did today.
All right, Amanda, that's a very good point. So I'm going to bring in Jim Byrne, who's a former state Democratic Party chairman. And Jim, your reaction to what Amanda said, because I'm going to play it this way, in that there's so much concern that the court has gone too conservative. It doesn't look like they did in these two cases, and some others recently either.
I agree. The Supreme Court has pushed back on the overreaching of the executive branch time and time again in the last 3.5 years. And in particular, to your question and to Amanda's comments, in the last month alone, 5 significant decisions. The only one that can be argued went the president's way was the issue on the contraception and the semi-repeal of some portions of the Obamacare. But no, there have been 4 major decisions now that have gone against the president. And I would note today's decisions were both 7-2. Chief Justice Roberts, conservative, writing for the majority, and 2 Trump appointees, Gorsuch and Kavanaugh, joining him. This is another example. This is another example of the Supreme Court of the United States in this very topsy-turvy administration pushing back on the executive branch and reinforcing the separation of powers and a separate but equal branch of government in the judicial system.
Mayor Chris Fry, I'm going to bring you in on this and just get your general opinion as a Republican and a mayor of a city here in Pennsylvania, your reaction to all of this.
Yeah, I'm not too familiar with what's going on with the case, but listening to all the other panelists and everybody here, we're elected officials, and I think each of us have been in a seat before or some level of it. And we know we sign off on the documents stating that, whether it's ethics or sunshine and understanding what we're required to do. I think just like most of us have said, he's not above the law, and I think the administration will get to that point. However, I don't think it's going to affect the election this year. I think it's one of those other things that COVID is too big right now. The economy is too big right now. This stuff's not going to really have much impact on the election.
All right, well, it could though, Chris. I'm going to bring in the rest of our panelists on this one as well. It might have an effect, though, on the debates if one columnist has his way, and that would be Tom Friedman. He wrote, and I'm going to quote now, "I worry about Joe Biden debating Donald Trump. He should do it only under 2 conditions. First, Biden should declare that he will take a debate only if Trump releases his taxes returns for 2016 through 2018. Also, he says that Biden should insist that a real-time fact-checking team approved by both candidates hired by the Nonpartisan Commission on Presidential Debates, and at 10 minutes before the scheduled end of the debate, that this team report on any misleading statements, phony numbers, or outright lies that either candidate may have uttered." All right, Keith, you've had a candidate in all of these debates in the past. What if someone tried to make those kind of rules? How would you react?
Well, I think I react by the fact that we talked about in recent weeks that the best thing that Joe Biden could do between now and November's election is stay in his basement and would probably win by 8 or 10 points. It's going to be tougher and tougher to do that. People are going to want to hear more and more from him, especially once he picks his vice presidential nominee, which is going to be an enormous decision this time, as we know, because we're going to have a 78-year-old man, if he wins, entering the White House. But I don't know that Joe Biden, the presumptive Democratic nominee, has a lot to gain from these debates. I think that the The president is looking forward to these debates. I think that this will be a time for him to be able to differentiate himself from his Democratic opponent. And in many ways, as I've said for weeks now, the whole retail side of politics is gone. And I'm not so sure that isn't a real big win for Joe Biden.
All right, I'm going to bring in Joe Mystic on this one. And Joe, you've seen a lot of debates, a lot of things that happen. Is it the fact that he wants a fact check 10 minutes before the end of the debate? Don't candidates always play a little loose with facts somewhere along the line during a debate?
Well, one thing for sure, we'd find out if they were playing loose with the facts if we had a real-time fact checker, and that would cut both ways. Joe's been accused of exaggerating a few things every now and then, and this would apply to him as well. I think that more than anything, the American public is interested in fairness right now. We've heard a lot about elections being fixed. There's been a lot of aspersions cast upon mail-in balloting. What could be better to restore our faith in the process than to have a level playing field as we enter these debates? Now, as Keith said, and he's right, if Joe Biden lays these down as conditions and Trump refuses, then there would be no debates. And I think Joe Biden wins either way. I think Keith's onto something. Whether Trump discloses his taxes so that there are debates, or whether he refuses and there are no debates, it looks like an upside for Joe Biden.
All right, Governor Corbett, you're one of the few people on this team of analysts that we have here who have participated in debates. What if you're the president and a demand like this is made? Your reaction?
My personal reaction is not going to happen that way. The fact checkers are you in the media. And if you always watch those debates, as soon as it's over, the fact checking goes on and everybody talks about it. It would take away, I think, from the openness of a debate. This candidate for the Republican Party, he has a difficult time keeping to a script. If I'm his advisors, I'm going to tell him, you don't want to do this. Now, that isn't necessarily what he's going to do, because I don't think he listens to his advisors very much. I agree with Joe. Actually, Joe Biden doesn't want to get on the stage and be limited by that, because he tends to exaggerate what happens, or he confuses what happens. And then that becomes a sideshow to what are they really debating, what are the issues, and what are we going to do? I have always found that these debates, as you say, are not truly debates. They're just comparing each other's stands, their platforms, and ripping down the other person. Those aren't really debates.
I'll throw this one out, and anybody can jump in if they want. And that is this really just a case of maybe trying to protect Joe Biden, because there's a lot of belief that he would not do well in a debate? I'll just throw it out there.
I first and foremost, I think the conditions are cowardly. I have my position, and I did a debate where my opponent had a laundry list of conditions. I think a debate needs to be a debate. You need to go in there, whether you use that information as ammo when you're in there to some of the topics that come up. I think that it's cowardly to put those things forward, and it'll show, for me, in terms of if I was just put myself in the voter's shoes, is that he needs to be equipped and ready and follow the script, whatever the case may be, and be prepared to go after in the debate after Donald Trump or Trump after Joe Biden, and just be prepared for that, because that's what, let a debate be a debate. It's like being in a boxing ring. You're ready to, who's going to win the fight, and that's what. Now we don't need conditions.
And I think what we know about Joe Biden is that he is indeed a fighter. So when you talk about put him in the ring, yes, he is indeed a fighter. And as someone who has done door knocking and phone banking and talked with voters, I know that when voters are looking at debates, they're not really concerned too much with the issues. They're concerned about how the candidates looked, how they sounded. It's all exterior, and how a candidate made them feel. Did they instill confidence in them? And so that's really what it's about. It's not about the issues and releasing the tax returns and the fact checking, because all of that's done later. and people hear more about that later. But people go with that gut reaction, that gut feeling when they're watching that debate about who a candidate is and what they instill in them. And if it's confidence,
let's stick with a boxing analogy for a minute. You know, even boxers are matched by weight. So they enter the ring with a level playing field, as level as we can make it. Joe Biden has released his taxes. Let Donald Trump do the same if he wants to debate.
I think that the Republicans should be careful what they wish for. A lot of the GOP are anxious about these debates in a positive way. At least they perceive it to be positive. They think that Donald Trump will do well against Mr. Biden. Donald Trump can't control the narrative in a debate. This is not a White House press briefing. This is not him in the Rose Garden telling reporters to shut up. He can't get away with it. And I do suspect that since he is so just easily going off track, or when he gives a statement, he'll just say whatever comes to mind. He has been caught in so many lies and inconsistent statements. It won't take much fact checking when Donald Trump starts talking for one of the moderators to say, "Excuse me, Mr. President, that's flat out wrong. Here's the data right in front of me." And I wouldn't be surprised if the debate host and moderators set some traps for him where they think he will tell a lie and they ask him a question intentionally. So Mr. Biden at the debates needs to do what he's been doing. Be decisive, be pragmatic, act like a leader, be calm, cool, and a steady hand. If Mr. Biden does that, he will be the person the Americans and the voters see as more leaderly versus the incumbent.
I think the Democrats believe, and maybe Joe Biden himself believes, he has everything to lose and nothing to gain by these debates. And it would not surprise me if they continue to add conditions and find a way not to have 3 90-minute debates within several weeks of the election. I think that the president would probably perform better, and I think that could be a moment in which the potential tide could change. I do believe if there will eventually be 3 debates, my sense is they might be the highest rated debates in our lifetime. I think a lot of people want to hear from both these people because there's been so much confusion and so much out there in 2020 that they need a 90-minute time to evaluate one gentleman to the other gentleman. So I have a feeling you're going to have record numbers of people watching. And quite frankly, I'm talking about like a political analyst here. I don't know that there's a real upside for Joe Biden entering these debates.
All right, let's move on to another topic, and that's also been heated discussion, and that is the outbreak of the coronavirus, re-outbreak, I should say, of the virus in this country, and also whether schools should open in the fall. So let me pose this one first to the governor. Your take on this: should schools be opening in the fall?
I certainly hope they're able to open in the fall. I think that is really a district by district decision. The parents are going to be heavily involved in that. The administrations are. I don't know what direction they're getting from the Department of Education in Harrisburg at this, but I still think it is a regional issue. For instance, if you go up to Forest County where Tionesta is, I think they've had 2 or 3 evidence of coronavirus. No reason for that school district up there to be closed. City of Pittsburgh, that might be a different story. So I think they got to do it on a regional basis. But what concerns me, especially I have a grandson that's going into 3rd grade, this distance learning is not easy on the young ones. And they need to get into a classroom if they possibly can. They need to be socialized with all their classmates. Maybe it's 50% one day, 50% the next day, but there has to be a strong effort in my mind to get the students into the classroom and get them back to as close to normal as possible in their education system.
Amanda, you have 2 children. Your take?
Yeah, I have 2 children who I expect to be starting school in the fall, and I certainly hope that they will be right here in the Pittsburgh public school system. I am very concerned about the coronavirus and what measures will be in place to prevent further spread of the disease in the school system. And I'm kind of like Governor Corbett in that sense that it has to be probably a region by region decision based on what's going on in their surrounding community. The problem, though, is that people aren't stationary. You know, today I'm in Allegheny County. Tomorrow I might be in Beaver County or Washington County or something like that. So we know that this is how part of how the disease is spreading as well, with people visiting places and carrying it back home. So it's still a concern, even if, you know, hey, we only have 1 or 2 cases here, let's open our schools. Whereas, hey, we have many cases here, we're going to close the schools, because it doesn't stop the spread of the disease as far as I'm concerned. But I do hope that there are some measures in place. I think school districts are supposed to submit plans to the Department of Education about reopening in the fall. And there will be a time to review those and see if they're adequate at that point. And I will certainly be looking.
My youngest son, Brandon, is going into his sophomore year in the Shaler Area School District. The issues in Allegheny County, the city of Pittsburgh, like the governor said, are totally different from what you'll find in the T or in Forest County or Potter, Cameron. Go up across the Sullivan corridor there, and you won't have the same problems. I do think it needs to be, first of all, I think it needs to be regional. I do agree that. I think Governor Wolf should give some type of an overall layout of a strategy, but I think it is indigenous to the regions based on the science, based on the testing. What it should not be, what it should never be, is the president ordering governors or telling states, and Betsy DeVos and others saying, you will open in the fall, ignoring the science, ignoring the data, and then the president threatening to withhold federal funding from those who don't open. He's forcing these kids into a hazard. And it is not a good idea to go after the educational, it's not wise to go after education and threaten to withhold funding. It could have dire political consequences for the president in states where he attempts to do that.
If we had a pandemic infrastructure in place, most of us would be more comfortable with this effort to reopen the schools. But the truth is, our federal government has failed us. We've had no leadership. We don't have testing. We don't have all the things we need in order to open the schools carefully and intelligently and safely. As a result, we're operating in the dark here. This is really a toss of the dice. And that's not something we should talk about when we're talking about the safety and the health of our children, of the educators who will have to be there, and of the families that they're all going to go home to.
I'll reiterate what I heard from the governor and from Jim. I do think it's a case-by-case basis. I think different parts of the state obviously have been affected dramatically differently. I also believe you have to have a plan. And not only do you have to have a plan, you have to implement the plan. You have to stick with the plan. And everybody from Dr. Fauci on down, a medical expert, said, if you follow a plan, if you follow safety procedures, you will not spread this disease. You have to wear a mask. You have to social distance. You have to have hand sanitizers available and wash your hands regularly. If you follow those procedures, you should be able to safely go back to some degree of normalcy. And that pivots to the other conversation. We're not dealing with schools right now. We're dealing with the back and forth with restaurants, clubs, and bars. What frustrates me is at some point I wish they would go to enforcement, because I've been to plenty of restaurants of friends and neighbors and entrepreneurs that have opened restaurants and bars in Pittsburgh that are following every rule, that have removed chairs, that won't seat you, that insist you wear a mask, that do everything right because they want to keep their restaurants open. And they're being closed with everyone else because they're not going after the perpetrators. We know the people in Oakland and the South Side and Lawrenceville and where these bars are. And if it would be reported, and if somebody got shut down for 30 days and 60 days because they were violating, and that made the news, people would think twice and would be able to continue to operate. But I think by punishing everyone, it's a real concern of mine.
That's exactly right. That's exactly the same type of policy or procedure should be implemented for the bars and the restaurant industry that we use with the LCB, that Allegheny County Council uses with the drink tax. It should be case by case by case in enforcement. If you're in compliance, why should you be punished? Why should you be punished for the guy down the street? And look, we have the ability to police on the LCB. We have the ability to police on the drink tax. Bars have been padlocked for failure to pay drink tax. Bars have been shut down for LCB violations. It should be no different with COVID compliance enforcement. Absolutely right, Keith.
All right.
So, Jim, are you going to talk to the county council and get them to change this?
If I was president, I would introduce, if I was still there, I would introduce legislation to do exactly that. Yes, I would.
Well, I nominate you to nominate there's somebody there to do it. We need fairness.
Yes, sir. We could get bipartisan legislation through government reform and pass with a veto-proof majority, I think, in 2 weeks.
Well, let's stay on this just for a second before we run out of time. This is kind of an interesting dilemma that we're facing. We went from red to yellow to green. People opened up, they started their businesses again, and people started going on vacations. They're coming back. They've been infected because they've been somewhere else that has it. Now they're infecting other people in this area. The bars and the restaurants, as Keith pointed out, that are complying are being forced to shut down. There's a criticism of the president. There's criticism of the governor. Where do we go with this whole thing? I mean, it's like you can't stifle people from being social, and you can't let the virus just run rampant.
It comes back. Very quickly. It all comes back to us. If you'll indulge me, it all comes back to this right here. That's all you have to do. Do that. Listen to the science. Listen to the CDC. Listen to our health experts, and then we can continue to live in a green phase. It's selfishness that is causing this problem, in my opinion.
I think Keith's right. You know, if we had enforcement, even on wearing masks in public, you know, if a few people got cited, and nobody wants that because, you know, it just adds to their woes. But if a few people got cited, you might see more compliance. This stuff about my freedom to not wear a mask is ridiculous. You don't have a freedom to risk a catastrophe. You don't have freedom to recklessly endanger other people. And that's what we're talking about here. But, you know, it may be in part, a large part, education, but enforcement would go a long way towards educating people.
And it's interesting. The first discussion we had today was no one's above the law. And I agree with that. If you're violating the law, you should pay the consequences of violating the law. And if you're a law-abiding citizen playing by all the rules that was dictated from you, from government, local, state, federal, and you get shut down, that's unfair too. Let's just let the 11 o'clock and 6 o'clock news lead with people that got shut down because they thought they were above the law, and people would rein it in, but quick.
That's what needs to happen. And these arguments from the Facebook and Twitter constitutional law experts that their constitutional rights are violated by wearing a mask. Professor Mystic, Governor Corbett, let's talk about it. It's not a violation of equal protection. This is a rationally related, this is legislation, government decisions that are rationally related to a government interest of public safety. So there's no constitutional violation here. It's ridiculous.
Well, I agree. I always talk to my class, and Joe does too, that the number one rule of government is public safety. And in this case, when public safety is affected by people going out with the corona or not even knowing it, and they won't take a measure as to covering up with a mask, I equate it to somebody who says, I don't need a driver's license. I can get in my car when I'm 14 and drive because I'm constitutional right to it. Well, no, we know you aren't. And maybe we need some legislation. You know, I know under the Emergency Act, I think they have the authority to do it. So what happens next? I agree with everybody that said this. It's enforcement. You got to come down hard, and then you can ease up, because once you come down hard, you hit some of those bars that you saw on the news, packed with people that were supposed to have 25 people in there. Hit them with a fine, a $10,000 fine, whatever, or close them up for a month, I think, as Keith said. Then you're going to see much more compliance. But until you see consequences, you're not going to see the compliance that you need.
We're almost out of time, so I'm going to have Chris Fry end it for us right here. And Mayor, you've heard about this. Everybody's saying enforcement. your situation in Newcastle is a little bit different than it is here in Allegheny County, but how easy would it be for a city to enforce such rules?
It would be virtually impossible for us to enforce every measure of our city. You know, we haven't had any resources from the federal government for our shortfalls. We're barely making it by with what we have now in terms of just trying to maintain, you know, just order in terms from the protests to COVID to the numerous other things, economically distressed status that we're in. I do agree that enforcement needs to happen, but there has to be some sort of financial opportunities and resources that come with that. So it can't just be blind shot. You guys just go out and do the same thing. There has to be some kind of support. I agree with everybody about the schools too, with the regionally opening up the schools based on the numbers. And but I'm seeing it every day that, you know, youth sporting events, youth activities, folks aren't practicing, you know, what's out there. And when I have a 4-year-old, it's impossible to keep her off of a playground. It's impossible to keep her from making new friends. It's impossible to keep her in the house. So those are things that really need to be considered. And I feel like that's where COVID is going to continue to spread with those very hard decisions. And go ahead and enforce a 4-year-old. How are you going to do that? You know, so it's hard. It's difficult. It's a difficult scenario. But in terms of local governments, there has to be some support that comes with it if we're really going to hit those hard. Newcastle's not exempt from the rise. We had 12, I believe, in one day yesterday or this week. The rise is definitely happening, so the support will need to have to come with it.
All right. I want to thank all of you for being with us once again on Around the Table. We are out of time, and we'll hope that you join us again next week for Around the Table. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Stacy.
Awesome.
Thank
Thank you.
Stacy.
Bye, everybody.
Stop recording.